Today we are looking into a pretty accelerated set of balance tuning, since we have just gotten one last Friday, and basically, 4 days later we have another set of changes for the PTR of Season 3. And to challenge expectations this time, we're not gonna go down alphabetically, we're gonna go in reverse. We're gonna start instead from Warrior, the last of the classes down the alphabet. Now, of course, what will look like a meme is the fact that Montantane has been changed and the 2-piece set bonus has been buffed by 725%, and then also increased by 100%, because the 4-piece set bonus increases this ionizing strike, which was just buffed by 725%, by an extra 50%. Now, the logic behind this, very simply, is the fact that prior to this set of changes, your ionizing strike wasn't really doing much of anything. It was sitting at sub 1% of your damage. So post buffs, this should be going much higher than now. This is meant to be some 5 to 7% damage increase, basically, to offset the fact that prior to this tier set was basically dead for warriors and wasn't really used that often. In return, though, Blizzard had to suck so much power to buff Montantane, they nerfed the rest. Colossus now has Demolish, increasing the critical strike chance of your next 1 Mortal Strike instead of 2, so only your next Mortal Strike or Shield Slam after Demolish is a guaranteed crit. And then Slayer, the 2-piece set bonus, you get 10% more damage from your Execute instead of 20% damage increase, which is a very minor change. It's like barely a 1% damage nerf in single target for this one, so it's not that big of a deal. Definitely the center of the attention for Warrior with these changes is to try to make Montantane an actually playable hero talent. Talking about playable hero talents, a Shaman is getting further nerfs to Stormbringer. This is now the back-to-back set of nerfs to Stormbringer for both elemental and enhancement. Again, hard to predict this. Who would have thought more nerfs around your free Ascendance procs, which are proving to be difficult to balance for Blizzard. For elemental, your 2-piece set bonus will now require 9 stacks of Awakening Storms instead of 6. So very simple TLDR, Awakening Storms is what you get to proc when you cast Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning, so that every 3 stacks of Awakening Storm you get a free Tempest. Prior to this, you needed to cycle this free Tempest twice to get into Ascendance. Now, with this nerf, you have to cycle this 3 times to get into Ascendance. For enhancement, now you get 6 seconds of Ascendance instead of 8. Now, elemental and enhancement, we have mentioned them being, okay in the PTR, towards the top half of results in the raid. You can see here enhancement and elemental, and then enhancement and elemental, and then over here you had enhancement and elemental a bit lower down on a pure single target fight, and then Nexus King again elemental and enhancement. And they were in the second tier of specs played in Mythic Plus. We mentioned, just like the raid actually, we had Marksmanship, Balance, Shadow Priest, Arcane Mage being played more in Mythic Plus, but after them elemental and enhancement alongside other specs like Wrecked Paladin and Devastation Evoker were the more played ones. So they are getting a nerf for their Mythic Plus hero talent, especially actually for elemental, more so than for enhancement. Very minor change for Paladin. For Lightsmith, you have a 75% effectiveness Hammer and Anvil when you get it from your abilities. Lightsmith was the only solace of Holy Paladin compared to how they have been doing in the raid, which we mentioned they were the overall worst healer in the testing of the raid. In Mythic Plus, they were also one of the least played healer, playing Lightsmith. Herald of the Sun is played in the raid, Lightsmith is played in Mythic Plus. This is not even like a relevant nerf for Mythic Plus either, it's just very minor. What is a bit larger, which might have a bit more implications, is that now Monk's Mystic Touch increases physical damage taken by 8% instead of 5. So we have now grown apart where, for example, when you go to a mage, you know, any mage, and you look at their class, you will find down their abilities called Arcane Intellect. This used to be back in the day upwards of 10% more intellect than 5, now it was nerfed to 3% more intellect. And then the other, you know, magical damage buff is found in Demon Hunter with their Chaos Brand, which also used to be 5% and was nerfed down to 3%. Instead, the Mystic Touch of Monk goes the other way. Instead of going from 5 down to 3, they go from 5 up to 8. Now, the explanation from Blizzard does make sense. The amount of classes that deal pure physical damage is quite a bit less than those that can deal magic damage. Because, you know, when you think about physical damage, you're like, oh, yeah, the melees, the DKs, the Demon Hunter, there's, you know, Survival, Windwalker, Red Paladin, all the rogues, Enhancement, right? But then you stop to think for a bit and realize that the majority of these specs still do magical damage. You look at the damage done by a survival over here, and you will find red. Red means fire. Red means fire damage, and this also means fire damage, which means 44% of their damage is magical. And then you add all of this, which is magical damage as well. This is arcane damage, so it's 31, 43, 50, 57, rounded up 58%, at least 58% magical damage as a survival hunter. You can even move over to Subrog and you will see that it's a lot of purple, for example, for shadow damage. Even though they are melee spec, a lot of their damage is not physical. And this is repeated for pretty much many of the melee damage dealers. Red, look, it's yellow. Yellow is holy damage or holy strike damage, mixed damage, which is still magical damage in the end, fire damage, holy strike damage. This is all magical. There's very little physical damage that red is doing. So what this means in the end is that you have all of the casters doing natural magical damage, except funnily enough, Demo is actually the only caster with some physical damage because of their pet physical damage. But besides them, all casters are doing magical damage, but not all melees are doing physical damage. Instead, most melees are doing at least half or more of their damage as magical. You have only the tried and true classics doing physical damage, being the warriors, as well as Outlaw Rogue, as well as BM Hunter, and wrong one, Feral Druid. So it makes sense to buff this value by more. Obviously, what this means is that this makes it, of course, even more mandatory, if it wasn't before, to play a monk in the raid, but also to possibly give them even more value in Mythic Plus. Because now you have a 5% damage gap from these specs to magical damage specs in Mythic Plus. If you bring a monk versus a Demon Hunter, right? If the Demon Hunter is in a group with Mage, Balanced Druid, and Destruction Warlock, while the monk is in a group with a Fury Warrior, a Beast Mastery Hunter, and an Outlaw Rogue, those three physical damage specs will do 5% damage more than the other group because of that buff. So that could be quite relevant in the future, perhaps for some turbo melee specs in Mythic Plus. Now, changes to mage are very minor. You have Frostfire. The 2-piece set bonus has a 30% damage increase to Meteor, Coming Storm, and Frostfire Burst instead of 10%. QOL, we went from the 2-piece set bonus having a 50% chance on Arcane Blast to give you a stack of Arcane Harmony. Now you're guaranteed to get 2 stacks of Arcane Harmony on your Arcane Blast. Same QOL to gain your stacking proc. For Arcane it's Arcane Harmony, for Frost is Cold Front. Now you have Icelands have a 100% chance to give you 1 stack of Cold Front instead of being an RNG chance, and Revert of the buff of Sun Fury now increases Spell Fire Sphere spell damage by 1%. It used to be 1, buffed to 2, and now it's back to 1. all of these are very minor changes. These are changes we touched on already, because a few of these bits in this set of announcement was already in the game. Blizzard already pushed it live and didn't mention it in the notes, like this one basically. Chrono Warden being buffed compared to what it was supposed to be was already known. Now you have Chrono Flame effect increased by 15% instead of 10, and the damage and healing is increased by 450% of the spell power instead of 400, and more importantly, Temporal Burst with the Mana Forge Omega 4 set bonus increases the number of Chrono Flame targets by 2 instead of 1. So you are hitting 3 targets every time you spam your Living Flame, and you get the extra Chrono Flames out as Chrono Warden. This has spiked up a lot the group healing power of Preservation Evoker, because this is pretty you know, non-committal power to get this healing. You can get your Tip the Scale cooldown to go down very low. Every time you use Tip the Scale, you get the 30-second buff, and during this Temporal Burst 30-second window, you can basically cleave very powerful Chrono Flames throughout the whole group, which gives you very consistent AoE healing, which was a weakness of Chrono Warden or Evoker in general, because once Evoker has Dream Breath on cooldown and Spirit Bloom on cooldown, you know, they can go for the emergency temporal anomaly into Verdant Embrace, into Emerald Communion, but outside of that, they are very tied to cooldowns. Chrono Warden with these changes is way more consistent in their healing. About things we already knew about, you also have the nerf to Flame Shaper, which was already also known about and also already live anyways, so we knew about this already. We didn't know about the Essence Bomb now triggering twice if the Evoker has 2 stacks of Inner Flame. That's cool. That's very cool, because as an Evoker, of course, you want to get 2 stacks of Inner Flame because you back-to-back cast Engulf very often. That's part of your combo as a Flame Shaper Evoker when you're healing, to double cast Engulf. So getting 2 stacks of Inner Flame, also guaranteeing double cast basically of Essence Bomb, is also very good for the healing of Flame Shaper in the raid. Of course, Flame Shaper is gonna be a raid hero talent for Evoker. Unfortunate change. This is unfortunate for Guardian. This, you know, 2-piece set bonus of Elune's Chosen, Star Surges cast by this set bonus no longer trigger Lunation's cooldown reduction effect, and Blizzard saying this was unintended. This is unfortunate because while it wasn't that big of a deal for Balance, Balance Druid in Mythic Plus was already playing with Elune's Chosen, and Balance Druid was already doing just fine cycling this 4-piece set bonus, gathering Moonlight stacks to gain the damage increase whenever they casted their Fury of Elune, because also the 2-piece set bonus was fine with the amount of arcane spells they casted. You know, gaining Astral Power with Starfire has a 50% chance to launch the free Star Surge. Meanwhile, though, for Guardian is Thrash has a 40% chance to launch a Star Surge. So for Balance, it's 50% chance at any time you gain Astral Power, and for Guardian it was just 40% chance when you cast Thrash. So Balance already had an easier time to get the Star Surges off than Guardian. Also, of course, Balance has already an easier time to get the cooldown reduction of their Fury of Elune. Fury of Elune has a 45-second cooldown base default, and Lunation gets you a 2-second cooldown reduction whenever you, again, cast arcane abilities. Meanwhile, when you go over to Guardian, you have a 1-minute cooldown of Lunar Beam, which you cannot reduce by your talents. You can only reduce, well, again with Lunation, again with your arcane abilities. The cooldown here reduction is 3 seconds instead of 2. But once again, you do cast more arcane abilities as Balance than you do cast them as Guardian, even when you go down Lunar Calling to turn Thrash into an arcane ability. So what this means, TLDR in short, is that this was already better for Balance. They already had an easier time to proc this, already an easier time to cast the free Star Surges and to get CDR on their Fury of Elune. Instead, they were getting so much CDR on their Fury of Elune, they couldn't even get full effectiveness on this buff because they could only ever get to 3 to 4 stacks of this and get 15 to 20% more damage because they would cast Fury of Elune so often. And it was just weaker for Guardian. And what made it strong is the fact that the free casts of Star Surge for Guardian were reducing the cooldown of their Lunar Beam. So with this change, Guardian is back basically into the D tier as a tank in Mythic Plus. Very minor, somewhat irrelevant changes for Demon Hunter. Where we have the bigger changes are in the entirety of Death Knight, which is also why we went backwards and started for last. So, attempt number 14 to make Rider of the Apocalypse good. Still not good. Still not the main meta pick, especially for... Actually, no, for both Frost and Unholy. Sun Lane for Unholy, of course, and Deathbringer for Frost are still the ways to go over these two sets of buffs. And also more buffs for Sun Lane anyways, so you're buffing Unholy's Rider, but you're also buffing Sun Lane, which was already stronger than Rider, so this does nothing. It just makes it strong. It just makes Unholy stronger on average, which was necessary. Unholy was turned into paste after their nerfs received a couple of weeks ago, which also sent DKs in despair in the PTR and practically fled the spec. So Blizzard is now going in with a round of very significant buffs. So first of all, Blizzard is trying to give more value to your crit. They have already started by giving you things like critical strikes cause the Festering Wound to burst for 20% more damage, or your 2 new talents you're going to be able to choose from when you go down this route. 25% more crit damage to your diseases, or 15% more crit damage for your minions. This continues here by also giving you crit value to your mastery. It increases the critical strike damage of your minions and diseases by 20%, scaling at a slightly reduced level than what your shadow damage and minion damage, which is your mastery, scale at. So this is an attempt of Blizzard, of course, of making the critical strike stat valuable. Because, of course, all of this is 0 as long as you don't crit. This buffs your critical strike damage, this buffs your critical strike damage, and then these changes buff your critical strike damage. So you need to crit first to gain the benefit of the critical strike damage. So obviously Unholy is very deep into haste and mastery. Mastery because of the value of your shadow damage when you're playing the non-pet shadow damage build, but even before, when they were playing minion builds, mastery was still good because of that. And then haste. More button presses, faster clicks. Unholy has pretty strong windows within Sun Lane when you get your Essence of the Blood Queen stacks up, and then you turn them with Gift of the Sun Lane to double the effectiveness of these values inside of your Blood is Life, Blood Beast procs. You want your haste up, you want your button pressed fast, so haste is also very valuable. It pushes you to go for haste and mastery at extreme degrees. So this is the attempt of Blizzard to give you some more value of crit, which is still not good. It's still not going to be one of your better secondaries even after these changes. Now, besides this, you have a series of buffs like Epidemic damage buffed by 30%, Death Coil damage buffed by 35%, Festering Wound burst damage also increased by 25%. So Epidemic was turned into a joke over time. Epidemic used to be this very simple to understand, dual choice for DK. Okay, on one target I press Death Coil, on multi-target I press Epidemic. It's not that difficult. Maybe on 2 targets the single target ability is still stronger, right? It's basically the same choice between Templar's Verdict and Divine Storm for Ret, or between Rain of Fire and Chaos Bolt, or between Chain Lightning and Lightning Bolt, this kind of decision. Except Epidemic turned to be so bad, you would have to wait like 7+ targets to start making Epidemic even decent if you were playing around your Death Call buffs, even your Harbinger of Doom and Sudden Doom procs, etc, etc. Epidemic was just weak. Even with this buff, it's still gonna be weak. You can see from here that the value of Epidemic is at the very, very bottom in terms of AoE attack power percentage per button press, per execute. Every button you are pressing, how much value does it have in terms of damage? You can see Epidemic naked, unbuffed Epidemic is practically the worst thing you can press in terms of valuable buttons. And then your Sudden Doom buffed Epidemic is just barely above. So this one now being buffed by 30% will bring them more or less around here. So we'll make them, you know, slightly decent, still far away from your bigger things like your Scythe, your Defile, and your Bursting Source being popped by your Scourge Strike. But at least now it's not nearly as terrible. Death Coil damage is good as well, single target damage. Unholy was also doing very poorly in the PTR, in raid testing, in terms of single target damage. And then more Festering Wound burst damage, of course, now that, poor guy, now that your Bursting Source only hit 8 targets, you want to increase the average damage of the ability itself, since they're not scaling up to 20 targets anymore. And then more scaling for Legion of Souls, counted now basically as a set of minions. Now Commander of the Dead and Unholy Aura scale with Legion of Souls. This is an attempt to make this underplayed right side of the tree also work with Legion of Souls. So now 20% more damage from Unholy Aura and 45% more damage from Commander of the Dead is going to go to Legion of Souls. Legion of Souls is basically the replacement of your Abom Limb, which does the same thing. It summons a bunch of souls from the ground, except they don't grab enemies, they just do damage and give you a whole bunch of Festering Wounds. Now it also scales with these 2 talents over the right side of DK, which is still not gonna matter for you to, you know, you're not gonna go down this side just to buff Legion of Souls anyways. But at least there is the, you know, the attempt to re-empower this spec, which is undergoing some serious changes after their loss of uncapped wide, very, very high bursty AoE damage. So Blizzard is now trying to basically buff the rest of their kit to make up for what they are losing. After them, though, this is a bit more surprising, is the set of buffs to Frost DK. The reason why it's surprising is because it's a flat 10% damage increase and 30% damage increase to Obliterate. You know, ignore this is irrelevant. And then consuming Killing Machine causes your Frost Sight to deal 4 times the normal damage instead of 3. But the real one are these 2. So a flat 10% damage is very good. Plus the Obliterate, like, back to looking at the PTR results, you know, Frost was here, Frost DK was middle of the pack, Frost DK was again here, and Frost DK was middling. It wasn't like so terrible you would think they needed a buff, but this is actually a very big buff, right? 10% more damage. And Obliterate, so Obliterate's value is way more, of course, in single target. When you look at this, 25% of the value and 20% of it is from Obliterate itself. So being buffed by 30% is a 6% single target buff. So between the 10% all damage buff and this 6% Obliterate buff is a pretty large buff in single target. Like even in this log, for example, we would just have to take this guy and buff him by 16%, basically, to their damage. Now, Obliterate, of course, will have a much lower value in Mythic Plus, in AoE. Yeah, you do see Obliterate here still being top damage, but that's not really true. The top damage here is by Glacial Advance. The 30% buff to Obliterate in Mythic Plus will be like a 1% damage increase. All of the value in Mythic Plus of your Obliterate comes from Arctic Assault. Consuming Killing Machine will fire a Glacial Advance through your target. So you auto-attack, You proc Killing Machine, you consume Killing Machine with Obliterate, and Obliterate will cast Glacial Advance. Except this will not actually be buffed by the 30% Obliterate buff, only this very small part in Mythic Plus will be buffed by that much. So it's a much larger buff in single target for Frost than it is in Mythic Plus, in AoE. This is the last one of the changes. Both of the DK specs were buffed significantly more Unholy than the buff to Frost DK, especially in AoE, trying to bring them back to a good level. Probably not as much as good as they were before, but at least still not completely terrible like players think Unholy is right now. So for today, on this Wednesday, on the eve of another weekly reset and on the eve of more raid testing this week, we will begin with the Mythic raid testing. So we will have more of these results to also be tested against the Mythic bosses. So for today though, on this Wednesday, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with of course everyone else who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, we will see. We are looking at a sub 25-degree week all the way until next Tuesday, hopefully.